Hey, family. Wow, it's been a minute since I've talked with you, and I'm very excited about today's guest because Timothy Allen Simon happens to be a very good professional friend of mine. I've learned so much from him over the years of our relationship. Let me just share a little bit about him with you, a few of his particulars. He's a graduate of the University of California Hastings, where he received a law degree, and he's equally proud of the degree he got in economics from the University of San Francisco. He actually serves on the board there. Timothy Allen Simon became commissioner by appointment of Arnold Schwarzenegger to the California Public Utilities Commission. It is there through our friend Gwen Moore that we met each other. And Gwen recently passed, so both of us are very, very happy to have the conversation that you're going to listen to today in homage to Gwen's life and her friendship to us. Timothy Allen Simon's life mate, Kim, happens to be a very elegant lady who I know, and she and he are very proud of him being a grandfather to some incredible people. Timothy is the current chair of the California Black Chamber of Commerce. And you know what? The Secretary of State just granted the right for this organization to change its name to the California African American Chamber of Commerce. That's a big deal for them. And I really congratulate Timothy on his work to help make that happen. What we're going to do is ramble through his life journey. You know, each moment of Timothy's life has been filled with history as well as nuggets of life lessons. And that's what I'm excited for you to listen in on today. You've heard a lot of conversations that I have had the privilege of bringing you that have been inspiring, teaching, some very thematic. But what Timothy and I are going to do today is just ramble through his life and then tie it all up into sharing his perspective on where we can be headed as a people and how we get there. So please, family, just sit back and enjoy another visit, this time with my dear friend who I call the Commissioner, Timothy Allen Simon.
Joining us right now is one of America's most successful female entrepreneurs.
Special guest speaker today, the first African-American woman
to own a billion-dollar company. Her name is
Janice Bryant Howroyd. She's the founder and CEO of
Act One is one of the largest staffing companies in the United States.
She's now ranked by Forbes as second wealthiest self-made African-American woman in America, behind only Ms. Oprah Winfrey.
She spent almost 40 years helping others find work.
Janice, great to have you on the show.
Wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much
for
joining us.
Janice, welcome to the program.
Janice, what about your point?
Hey, Commissioner. So how are you doing up there in Northern California? I know a lot's going on, even more now.
Despite it all, we're doing wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Howroyd. But, you know, we have very, I probably outside of my home have maybe a 5-mile visibility of that because of all the smoke from the wildfires. And one of my cars is covered with ash, and it's strange times. I'm waiting for the locusts and maybe Godzilla on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Well, at least you're smiling through it. Then again,
yeah.
If you're quarantined with Kim, I know you've got some really good support there.
Well,
By the way, will you give Kim my love? She's such a dynamic lady. I'm going to want to talk about her in a little bit, but primarily I want to talk with you because, you know, with so much going on right now, many people are saying that they're ready for 2020 to be over. But I talked with you since we've been quarantined at home. And you did mention to me in one of our conversations that you're using this as a classroom. I guess there's no better place to jump off for everybody than for you to just tell us, what do you mean by using 2020 as your classroom?
Well, I'm sorry, I paused there. I am actually working with students right now that are preparing for the California bar exam. It's something that I've done since I passed the bar. I had a prayer, somewhat of a covenant with God that when I passed, I would always dedicate myself to helping young lawyers, and particularly minority lawyers, pass the exam. So it has become a classroom for me to work with a number of exam takers now for the upcoming exam, which is in about 3 weeks, actually.
Wow, well, that's fantastic. I mean, I don't know. Before COVID, we said the last thing the world needed was more lawyers. Then again, they're the good guys like you. So I'm going to believe that you are bringing those students in who are going to follow your trail. And that's exactly what I want to do a little bit of right now is follow your trail. Before we get there, though, I've already shared with everybody how you and I have such a great relationship. What I'd love to do before we jump into that is bring us up to speed on who you were before you became commissioner. You grew up where you grew up and how you grew up. So much of that, I think people get an interest in because it kind of helps us get an idea about how you've evolved. So let's take us from Tim, the baby.
Well, I was born here in San Francisco, California. I'm a native. My mother and father were part of the Great Migration. My mother came here from Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was born and raised on Greenwood Street. Her grandfather was a contractor and built a number of buildings on Greenwood.
Wow.
And my grandmother shared with me at a very young age the experience of not only Black Wall Street, but the tragic riots of 1921. That my mother's Betty Opal Lavasar Simon Johnson, and I'll always keep her near to my heart. My father migrated here from Lake Charles, Louisiana, but he was actually discharged from Port Chicago. He was a World War II disabled veteran. He was injured clearing the munitions chambers there in Concord, California, better known as Port Chicago, after the tragic explosion of what I believe was 1946 or 47, where hundreds of African-American sailors were actually killed in the explosion. They met here in San Francisco and, started a family and moved to an area of they started in the Western Addition, the Fillmore area of San Francisco, known as the Harlem of the West, and moved out to the southwestern part of the city, an area called the Ingleside, and most African Americans refer to it as Lakeview. My mother was pregnant with me when they bought the home in 1954. I was born in 55. As you know, that's a year after the Brown v. Board of Education versus Topeka, Kansas decision. So I was really almost born into the momentum of the movement for our nation to achieve, full equality. And that's really—
Well, let me tell you something already where you've talked, you've mentioned some really important landmarks. And when we think about it, whether we're talking about Port Charles with the weather and what's going on right now, or whether we're talking about Wall Street and Oklahoma. And I've had so many of my friends, particularly white friends, who have gotten such a big interest in both of these now. And then you go on to Fillmore. I mean, well, some of the best music I ever heard came out of Fillmore jazz clubs as well. So this is big right now. And you're speaking of it in a very comfortable fashion as being your past and your history. And I think that's really interesting that you can be comfortable to talk about it, but there has to be some passion underneath from that, seeing where we are right now. And I'm speaking particularly in terms of 2020, again, as your classroom and so much going on that you've already learned.
Oh, you're so right, Ms. Howroyd. My father owned nightclubs, and I was around jazz musicians and artists much of my life. My mother was very active as a community organizer. So for me, seeing where we are today as a nation, I have optimism in that I'm very impressed with this younger generation in a multitude of areas, not just protests, but just what I'm seeing with young entrepreneurs in the energy and utility space, and some of the educators and writers that are, coming forth. But on the other side, it's so tragic to see the potential that this nation is not grabbing, is not taking full advantage of. That need to create the classes either based on race or poverty or other issues that this society seems to have a knack for doing can be difficult, can be troubling. I'm living in a town with many, many billionaires, yet there are people that are sleeping on the streets, will be sleeping on the streets tonight with this
Well, that's a big conversation, but I do want to make note of something right now. Now, you're just a couple of years younger than I am. My experience going to school in North Carolina, most of my friends know, was quite a different experience. It was a very segregated experience.
Right.
You mentioned Brown v. Board of Education, and you've been to my office. You've seen Ruby Brown on my wall.
That's right.
When I attended school, I attended it in a very close community, but it definitely was a segregated community, and not just segregated in race, but in opportunity, in resourcing, et cetera, and all the things that happened alongside that or within that dynamic. Now, you attended school in San Francisco area in Northern California. What was it like for you, and what is it like for you now as you're working with students, albeit at the level of university? Where's the growth? What have you seen?
Well, ironically, I was educated in a very integrated environment. My kindergarten was in public school, Jose Ortega, which was fully integrated. There was no busing. It just so happened that a number of African Americans, by way of the Great Migration, they began to move into this community.
Even the name of your school suggests that you guys were ahead of us.
Yeah. And then my parents, both Catholic, opted to put us into parochial schools. And I was taught by the Daughters of Mary and Joseph, a order of nuns that were out of Ireland. And again, it was an integrated environment, even though it changed over time. It became more and more Black and Latino and Pacific Islander. But I can say this.
Now, let me understand something, though. You do have a Muslim movement, a Black Muslim movement in your past. And here you are, a Black kid, at that time a Black boy, going to Jose Ortega school, and then moving to a parochial school run by nuns from
I know.
I'm really interested in what that's done for your psyche.
You can't write this stuff, right? Yes, I did in my younger years, going from about 17, 18 until I was about 22. I was in the Nation of Islam. And some would say, how'd you go from Catholic to Nation of Islam to Republican? And I've always seemed to recognize that we have more in common than we do apart as a people. The Nation of Islam had a focus on education. They had what was called the Muhammad University of Islam schools, a very similar structure to Catholic parishes, which typically had their own grammar and middle school. So I saw that commonality as a focus on education. My gravitation towards the Republican Party at that time, I'm no longer a registered Republican, was based upon what I viewed as economic empowerment, as opposed to social, the social safety net, which I appreciate more now, as a senior citizen than I maybe did as a young, vibrant, what I would consider revolutionary.
Well, I do recall the Nation of Islam around, I think the time you're referencing, were very strongly in favor of self-run communities and saw many of the social programs as being ill-defined, therefore ill-intended in their minds. Is that the same teaching you're speaking of?
Exactly, and ironically, Ms. Howroyd, that's what I shared with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger when I first met him. And he posed the question to me as, how did I migrate from being a Black nationalist into the Republican Party? And I said, there were a lot of commonalities. In fact, even the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates pointed this out in kind of...
I'm more interested in how he migrated from being married to a Kennedy. Right. But hey, look, Arnold, if you're listening, you'll be back. Go on.
Well, he's an amazing man. And working with him, I quickly recognized that he absorbed thoughts in positions, as he said, having Sergeant Shriver as a father-in-law, yet, being an active Republican heading up the president's Commission on Physical Fitness under George Herbert Walker Bush. And we would discuss these things all the time. In fact, since we're just having conversation, the great Sugar Ray Robinson actually gave Arnold Schwarzenegger his first loan that helped him build his bodybuilding and eventually movie and empire. He's probably shared this with you. But so I never allowed labels to prevent me from looking under the hood and understanding the mechanics or the dynamics of a movement, of a policy, of a politician, of a business. I've always felt that you have to take time to really learn what the intent is. And again, in that belief that there's good in all of us. Yes, the nation did believe in separate communities. We actually believed in 7 separate states. And at the time, I was a zealot, and I just wanted separation because I felt it was the only means of justice. I think for many people, that was a scary thought. But now, practicing law as long as I have, there still is the rights of privileges and immunities, the Commerce Clause, ingress and egress. So I think that the idea, like Mormons decided in terms of Utah, like our Jewish brothers, sisters have decided in the terms of Israel, I think that understanding that sometimes you have to have a certain level of sovereignty in order to build on your qualities is not necessarily a radical thought, but at that time, I think it was viewed as very radical.
Well, let me ask you something. Let's go there, because you and I have been there a lot. Let's go there. In terms of sovereignty bases itself, not its principle, but definitely the platform, on the idea that there is one unique group.
Right.
What is the unique group that the nation was seeking sovereignty for? Was it African Americans, or were we still Black back then? We just moved from colored, right? I'm thinking back to where I was, because I heard Jesse Jackson say something years ago, and then he repeated it in a conversation that we had one-on-one, because I asked him about it. The comment he referenced, and you've talked with him, the comment he referenced was, we don't know each other, that we are, and the we he was speaking of was people who identify as African American. We don't know each other. So how was the nation building a sovereignty amongst people? Was it to spread the news, the guys with the bean pies and the papers on the corner?
That was me.
We definitely didn't have internet back then, okay?
Right.
And in my hometown, we didn't have the corner for the bean pies. I didn't find out about that until I went to university in Greensboro, North Carolina. But you get the question that I'm going at. What was the sovereignty? Because for most of us, no, let me qualify myself. Let me be appropriate. For me, growing up in the South, I didn't even know a Nation of Islam until I reached university and heard about them. Was quite afraid of the idea until I got excited about Angela and Huey's afros, and they made such a big fashion statement to college students that drew our attention to the message underneath the hood. But that sovereignty thing, where was the population for that gonna come from?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think the theology, the concept of, the white man being a grafted devil, the belief in a mothership, a lot of the dogma that existed within the faith. Remember, Moses talked to a burning bush, right? So I think it has prevented many people from looking under the hood of that movement and how it was derived and what it meant. Yes, there was clearly some cult and mysticism involved, but getting back to the theology, it was the lost found Nation of Islam in the wilderness of North America. And the efforts of Elijah Muhammad and the leadership.
Hold on one second. You may be going there. I want to make sure you do. Many of our listeners are young adults throughout Europe as well, and other countries. So I need you to identify the Islam we're speaking of, because Islamic faith comprises different sects for the period you're speaking to. I don't want you to premise a conversation on something that many of the Islamic followers of Islam across the world today would be confused about what you're saying.
That's so important.
And the bean pie thing.
Right, it's so important. And of course, as El Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, discovered when he made Hajj, was that the teachings that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was putting forth in America were not consistent with the Sunni or Shia movements around the world. It was a a doctored form that was specifically designed for a people that were in and coming out of enslavement, both mentally and physically. So I think it is very important to make that distinction, and I do believe that that's, Islam is a beautiful global faith, and it shouldn't be characterized based upon classifying any group of people. The Holy Quran says we're all the same in the eyes of God when we're praying. So again, that commonality, that man is equal, is very important. Elijah Muhammad was not a believer in that side of the faith. He taught something that was more designed in his view, and that view has been criticized and also glorified. In both cases, I think in some cases excessively, but it was viewed as trying to re-educate a people that have been enslaved, that they have a glorious past, that they have enormous capabilities. The effort.
Well, the Jewish faith does teach, and I've referenced this quite often lately, Helm's Bakery, that I would pass by frequently when I lived on Venice Beach in California. And the main thoroughfare I passed by Helm's Bakery, and above the door was etched in stone, not hung on a sign, those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. So right. I think many groups, many sects, many people believe that history has value not only to the present, but to how we design for the future. So just what was the distinction between what Elijah Muhammad was teaching in the sect of Islam you were following, the nation, and what the larger Islamic faith teaches even today?
I think what Elijah Muhammad was teaching probably had as much Christianity in it. I learned more about the Christian faith in the Nation of Islam that I did in 16 years of Catholic education. Well, actually, I hadn't yet met 16 years. I was in high school, so I was somewhere between 10 and 12 years of Catholic education. So it was a interesting mixture of Christianity and certain elements of Islam. I think the Christianity, and this is somewhat speculative on my part, but I think the Christianity was designed to reach a largely Christian population and to have them understand that, Elijah Muhammad's interpretation of the Bible and history. I thought that was, that was an important element. Like the Jewish faith, major focus on the Old Testament, and the view that the New Testament may have some issues in terms of veracity. So the idea was that these people that were pulled from their land, and I'm getting deep in the weeds here now, but were part of what was called the lost found tribe of Shabazz out of Africa, had been pulled from their land to America, put through slavery, put through Jim Crow. In the early 1930s, living in Detroit, he was from Savannah, Georgia. He began to attend meetings taught by a gentleman by the name of Farad Muhammad. And from those meetings came this belief in a new indoctrinated or kind of manufactured form of Islam that was specifically directed towards the African-American community. At the time that I came in, the organization
And that would be anybody with 1/16 or more.
Correct, which was also the formula or the biology that America used to determine if you were Black or an octogenarian or went into different levels. So the focus was on, and that was designed to be that nation. That was designed to be that nation. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting for me because, and I think for everyone who's listening, because when we take your journey from pre-Catholicism into Catholicism and into parochial school with that, then move you, and by the way, I made the comment pre-Catholicism because of where your folks journeyed from. Louisiana, no big surprise, but when you talk about people from Kentucky, there wasn't a big Catholic group there. So then now your parents are bringing you up Catholic. Right. You go into Islam. What drove you to Islam? Was it the lure of the times, or was there something particular? And I'm getting you from there to where you are now because you know, you've been called pretty, during the time you were Republican, you were pretty radical Republican. You were the tree shaker Republican. So, so I want us to understand what drove you to your membership in the nation, your following of the nation, because I'm guessing commission some of that same stuff was what drove you over there to shake up those Republicans. I don't think you grew up in that community.
Well, you know, my grandmother, Leola Lavasa, was the oldest living member of First Baptist Church in Tulsa when she passed. My mother converted to Catholicism when she married my father, because then, you know, the children in a Catholic or combined marriage, combined faith marriage, the children were vowed to be raised Catholic. And my mother wanted to be the same faith of her children, naturally. However, she always had an appreciation.
Well, without any comment on that plus or minus, that is one way to get them there. So
yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's one way to bring them in. You got that right. So she always had an appreciation for the Protestant faith and the principles and the guidance that she had as a young child in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where my father, again, as you point out, being raised in Louisiana, came up in a very, very Catholic environment. His mother went to mass my grandmother went to mass every morning. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting blend that existed. Then my father was from a family of 16, and many of them migrated to the San Francisco Bay Area. So we had a large extended family that was also very Catholic. So when I opted to decide to become Timothy 2X, it sent shockwaves through my family. I think there was an extraordinary amount of disappointment.
What age were you when you made that decision?
I was around 16, 17 years old. I think I got my ex. I had just turned 18 when I got the letter that said I would now be, you know, Timothy 2X. But yeah, in fact, I think it hurt my family. I was viewed as one of the shining stars of my family. You know, I almost tear up when I think about it, because all my aunts and uncles are pretty much gone now, and both of my parents. So I think there was a degree of hurt and disappointment as to what drove this man or this boy, who seemed to have so much going for him, to, you know, join and be part of an organization that, at least publicly, you look at, you know, C. Eric Lincoln's The Black Muslims, or Malcolm, you know, or Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X, that was viewed as this place for former, you know, ex-offenders. How did this young man raised in this kind of environment?
Yeah, because they did get a lot of them converted.
Yes.
In the prisons.
It was probably the nation's first recidivism program, when you think about it, in terms of Elijah Muhammad directing much of his recruitment inside the prisons. He spent time in prison for not going into it was either World War I or World War II. So yeah, I think it hurt my parents initially. I think I really do. I tried to remain the same person. I still tried to remain a good person, but so much of my time was dedicated to selling papers on the streets, selling the bean pies, selling the fish, that I feel that people began to probably kind of see me as being sort of in a cult space, that I had changed dramatically from the student athlete that, you know, BSU leader, then on and on that they had known. But for looking back now, it was part of my evolution. It was the path, I believe, that was chosen for me. There were some setbacks. I think the isolation wasn't healthy. To this day, I regret that I stopped playing competitive sports. What a lot of people don't know, Muhammad Ali was expelled from the Nation of Islam for not ending his boxing career. And then an exception, you know, was created close to Elijah Muhammad's death. So, you know, there were things that, as I look back on now, as the book says, as a child, I thought as a child, now as a man, I think as a man, you know, but there was also a lot of positive things about it. And, you know, I came up at a time when cocaine was becoming a recreational drug. And it wasn't just musicians. It was just matriculating through my entire community. Many of my friends became addicted to cocaine, and then in particular as the crack cocaine or freebasing, and even
it's important that you delineate between what happened first and then the movement to crack, because that's a whole nother social conversation as well. But if you can do a real quick conversation on that, most of the comments, most of the questions that come back in the conversations I have are coming from people outside of the US who sometimes aren't as familiar with the US culture that we're speaking from. So can you quickly just talk about how, you know, cocaine, and it was the party drug, it was the clean drug for and white people drug, and then crack came in and kind of changed the dynamic. And there's some who actually have political ideas about how crack came in. So if you can just help us from your perspective.
Yeah, and you know, that even intertwines in today with the omnibus crime bill and Joseph Biden being the, you know, the author of that bill that had a different sentencing for rock versus powder cocaine. But, you know, coming up out of the summer of love, I'm in San Francisco in the summer of love, and drug use, be it LSD, mescaline, peyote, I can go on and on and on. And in that group of drugs was cocaine. In fact, there's a opening of the song Rainy Day with Jimi Hendrix and Buddy Miles, where you can hear him taking a snort and he says, "Man, I see what you mean." So cocaine, and not most folks are already smoking weed, you know, but cocaine became a prestigious type of, it meant that you would elevate it to a certain economic level that you now can get high. And I love what Richard Pryor, the great comedian, maybe the world's greatest comedian, said, that a friend said to him, "Man," he said, "cocaine will not, you won't get addicted to cocaine. I should know. I've been doing it for 15 years. So, you know,
I'm
so
laughing, but it's not a funny thing.
Right. So people were walking into drug use, and particularly cocaine, thinking that there were not consequences. But in my community, I began to see the consequences clearly. And if nothing else, you know, the Nation of Islam at a young and vulnerable age, I have a brother who became addicted to cocaine at a young and vulnerable age, sheltered me from a lot of the things going on around me that, you know, who knows how I would have managed it. I can't say that, but I know that I was not in a drug environment. I was in a very clean environment.
So in your case, it truly is literally a moment of there but for God.
Yes.
So,
some of the other movements were almost, I remember reading the requirements of the general orders of the Black Panther Party, and it said that you cannot smoke weed while you're on post. It didn't say you couldn't smoke weed, but you couldn't smoke weed while you're on post. So, you know, and now cannabis is legal. So we've also evolved as a society. So I don't want to put any deference on that.
in your community, you live in a certain part of the U.S.
Correct. You know, I'm on the west left coast like you. Telly Savalas would call it in Kojak the land of fruits and nuts. You know, we do things differently out here. We just do. We're in a bubble as compared to the rest of the country. We both see it as we travel the country and
the rest of the world.
Yeah, the rest of the world. But like often the case of those who do not follow the path, you know, that has already been paved, we are also leaders in so many areas.
And we do set pace for a lot of what, or historically, we've set pace for a lot of what happens in the world. I remember when I first started my company, I was told by, actually, it was our dear, recently departed friend Gwen Moore, that remember, you're like California now. You're not just in California. And I asked her, "Congresswoman, what do you mean?" And we didn't have the close girlfriend friendship that we grew to have when she told me this. She actually showed up at my office to chastise me because I had not become a certified minority business. And I was doing very well, thank you, over $10 million with a high profit you know, annually, and I didn't need to have anybody put a stamp on my business. But she taught me, and you know what happened from there. But one thing she did tell me, she said, "You're not just in California, you are California." And she said, just like California set the pace for the rest of the country, so will your behavior in your business set the pace for the rest of what happens for minorities in business. I didn't want to own that. Who's that athlete who said, mothers, be your own children's role models? I don't want to be your role models.
I think that was Charles. Was that Charles Barkley?
Yeah, Charles Barkley.
Yeah,
I
it was
felt a little
Charles
bit
Barkley,
like
yeah.
Sir Charles, there.
Yeah.
Why should I accept that? But Gwen taught me that and took me back to some of my own teachings growing up, that sometimes you don't select the role, you're given the role. And so that was my foray into a lot of the work that I've done around diversity and inclusion. And candidly speaking, the whole reason that you and I came to meet later. But let me not cut you off from the conversation you were having on how you transitioned from Catholic to the nation, and then what brought you out.
Well, I always had an interest in enterprise. My father was an entrepreneur, and actually my mother was too. She started her own nonprofit social services agency.
Yeah, your mom is quite interesting and has been a constant conversation throughout our relationship. Maybe it's a good time to talk about her, especially her reaction to you leaving the nation. We know how she felt about you joining the nation.
Yeah. My mother was a fascinating woman. I don't think there's an hour that goes by that I don't think about her. She moved out here at a very young age to go to City College of San Francisco. I think she was 16 or 17 years old. Anyone that knew her from Tulsa, she was voted to be the most, expected to be the most successful. She starred in the play. She was the homecoming queen, Booker T. Washington High School there in Northeast Tulsa, Oklahoma. She always had a passion for those in need, and particularly girls in need. My mother's, and I think I shared this with you, my grandfather was killed in a poker game when she was 8 years old. And so even though her grandfather, my great-grandfather, Matthew Johnson, stepped up and was largely a father figure for her, but she came up in a household of 4 sisters with no father. And I think she knew at a young age the vulnerability that girls have. And that's where she dedicated, in her last days, she was battling cancer. I said, Mom, I'm beginning to recognize that your agency was really your ministry. Her ministry was providing a safe space for the girls who she would sometimes refer to as who had been marginalized or traumatized. And that's largely what she dedicated much of her life to. She also worked at Emporium Capwells at one time and also worked in the Head Start program, starting as a bus driver at Booker T.
Wow.
Washington.
Well, a lot of people do say that more ministry happens outside the church than in the church, or outside of religion than in religion. Not to be politicizing on any of it. Your family has quite a history of that as well, albeit they were brought up members of religions.
Well, it's interesting that because my mom and dad, they separated and divorced when I was around 7 years old. But my father, through his businesses in San Francisco, starting with a catering business and growing it into a beverage entertainment enterprise, I think he calculated that he hired close to 2,000 people, most of them African-American, over the course of his business. I know that, you understand that fully. In fact, he would always say to me that, son, it's a different frame of mind or thinking when you have to make payroll, as he would say. When you have to make payroll, your world changes, So he actually viewed his world as having a strong sense of ministry involved in it. And he was an icon, both a business and a social icon in the city. He, had a brand new Rolls Royce in his 40s and had one of the most successful entertainment establishments in the city. So, so yes, they were both, and they were in their young 40s, I think, when I went into the nation. And yeah, they didn't understand it.
You left this balling family to go into the nation and live a life of deprivation and standing on corners trying to bring people in.
Well, balling, yes, to a degree, but again, when you're making payroll, and my father had a lifestyle very commensurate with the industry that he was in, there were challenging times. There were challenging economic times. I think anybody who came out of a business family, understands that. But yes, I was viewed as, having a certain degree of privilege and access, going to a Jesuit prep school, and it was troubling. And even the Jesuits who taught me at St. Ignatius College Preparatory, where I ended up serving on the Board of Regents and Board of Trustees. I was the founder of the Black Students Union there. But they would bring me into the office just to try to say, so can you explain this message to the Black man? I read the book. Can you explain it to me now? And so I think it created a lot of
You're explaining it to the professors. Okay.
Yeah, to the priests. I am.
Okay.
I am. It's almost like Jesus when he was in exile in Egypt explaining, things. So so I guess my life has always been to some degree contrarian. But I also think that if people were to look under my hood, and I think that happened when I was appointment secretary, and all of a sudden Arnold Schwarzenegger is appointing these African Americans and Latinos and women and LGBTs all around the state, they saw that this Republican here understands that we're better as a society when people are empowered and not disenfranchised. And that's in every element.
So was Arnold a Republican, or was Republican the ticket that he got to move forward politically on?
Boy, that's a really good question. And I from my conversations with him, he believed in free markets. He was a big fan of Milton Friedman. And I believe he did believe, as he shared with me, because when he asked me about my journey, and I told him I opted to go with the Republican Party, he said when he arrived here in '69 from Austria, he looked at both parties, and as he described it, one seemed to be more focused on social welfare, the other one on economic development, and he wanted to develop an empire. He knew at a very young age when he came out to Santa Monica that he wanted to build an empire, and he felt that platform was the more conducive platform for him building a business empire.
As did you at that time. But look, let's be real. You got to keep it real around here. You don't necessarily view that the Republican Party is the better economic attentive party today. What happened?
Well, I think the jury's out, but I do believe that if you continue to cut taxes, you will get a certain degree of economic stimulus, but at what price? I think the trickle-down belief that if we strengthen the economy, that we create a stronger tax base requires balance. Economically, I'm a Keynesian. I believe much in what Sir John Maynard Keynes taught about having the need of government to be there when there are market failures of sorts. And that's why we have regulations and regulatory bodies like the California Public Utilities Commission or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because history has taught us that markets could allow monopolies, markets could allow environmental hazards and other matters that you need government to step in. Markets can view poverty and not have the same empathy as governmental entities or faith-based entities do. So I think you just have to have a balance.
So hold on. Okay, so here's Timothy. Parents make it in the Golden State. Timothy goes through his own personal growth, becomes a lawyer, builds a career. Now, you went from a Democratic type society into the Republican Party. Then you left the Republican Party. You believe rather Keynesian. However, let's be clear. It was your personal work through the organizations that you had helped to build that started to influence not just, along with Gwen Moore, how African Americans got a shot at it and other minorities in the utilities and in the energy space. You also did work around the financial space as well. I mean, it's up to you to shout out your relationships that you've built. It's not my place, but you built some pretty strong financial opportunities for folks too that are household and brand names.
Yeah, well, I was trained as a banking and securities lawyer and compliance officer. And when I became a commissioner, at the California Public Utilities Commission, I think there were two factors. I knew nothing about energy at the time, other than living through the electricity crisis as we all did. I knew virtually nothing about energy regulations. But
you knew Gwen Moore.
I knew Gwen Moore, God rest her soul. And I knew that it had strong financial implications because utilities are net borrowers. They borrow money and then go to a commission to get approval for rates to pay off what they borrow, or vice versa. It just depends upon the state and sometimes the business model. So I learned quickly that the commission approved the financing applications of the utilities. So it was like a mini Securities and Exchange Commission in that regard on their debt and preferred shares or preferred stock. And I was blessed to be introduced to some dynamic bankers like Jim Reynolds, the highly regarded CEO and founder of Loop Capital Markets, Sam Ramirez, Sr. of Ramirez and Company, and many others, that John Rogers of Ariel Capital.
Yeah, you had to mention him because that's who I was thinking about.
John Rogers, who was a big advocate when he went on the Exelon board and in many areas. And I should say that he's the son of Jewel LaFontaine, who was one of the real pioneer Republicans, sat on corporate boards in the 60s. You know, just an amazing, amazing woman. So I get to the commission and I have this financial background. And then getting back to Arnold Schwarzenegger, when I was appointment secretary, he gave what I like to call a blank check when it came to diversity, what they could now call diversity. In Arnold's mind, he really wanted me to get more African Americans in his administration. I was even criticized by some minority groups of having a greater focus on African Americans. So I knew when I got to the commission, there were certain goals that he had in terms of climate change and expanding broadband and other areas that were very critical to his administration and term. But I knew that he expected this to be with a strong emphasis on creating opportunities for communities that did not have those opportunities in the past. Now, some doctrinaire, so-called conservative Federalist Republicans would believe that's overreaching. But I've said to my conservative friends, many of whom I stumped with, re-examine your philosophies and explain to me, is your disdain for a safety net based on the belief that it hurts society or the concern that a certain race of people may have access to the resources that you have built this country on? So I think that in the period that we're in now, I think it's a great time for both sides, both parties, to examine their value base and our moral base on what.
How did you never get exhausted, or perchance you did, at having to have those kinds of conversations over and over when you were talking with supposedly intelligent people who had achieved or had been birthed well financially? How did you not exhaust having to have that conversation over and over?
One, I love the topic. Two, in terms of, in the African American community, you are targeted when you're a Republican, and people always want to argue with you. So you learn to be prepared, and you learn to
well, when I asked you, was Arnold really a Republican, or was that just the ticket he used to get to where he wanted to go? One might also ask, were you really a Republican, or did it allow you to shake the trees you wanted to shake and get more doors open to that?
No doubt that the line was shorter on the Republican side. I mean, I was elected to the Republican Central Committee in San Francisco, which is almost a joke in and of itself. I was the vice chair of political affairs. And then within 3 years, I'm sitting in Sacramento as the appointment secretary. So clearly the line was shorter than in the Democratic Party, where there was just the cup runneth over with amazing and brilliant Black talent. Because since FDR, we have largely focused on one party for reasons that I'm not going to argue with. That political choice is a very personal choice, probably right next to faith, So yes, I've been in many arguments about my belief, and it's no different than like a boxer. When you're going to fight, you train a lot, and so I would train so that I'm in a position to explain that. And by the way, a party that I've left, I'm now a part of the Lincoln Project, but a party that was founded on the abolition of slavery, a party that there were more signatures on the 64 Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act than Democrats, a party that really built itself on the belief of the party that imposed Reconstruction on the South. I can go on and on and on. So there's a glorious history.
You may need to soon, but okay.
But that's lost. It's no longer that party. That party's gone. That party checked out. It's gone. And I'm not going to give all the credit to President Trump. I saw that happening over time. I was on a national call with Steve Schmidt, who's MSNBC, former political campaign manager for John McCain, also ran the Arnold Schwarzenegger 2006 reelection campaign. And we were on a national call to draw support for Governor Schwarzenegger in his reelection bid. And I said to him, and at that time, the president of the California Republican Party, dear friend, someone who gave me the chairman's award, a very prestigious award. I said, this party is going further to the right and the white. And racism, and this is very relevant to where we are today, racism is like wildfire. I don't care what side, whether it comes from white folks or certain African countries that have the tribal differences or other parts of the world, it's like a wildfire. Once people get caught up in that tribalism, it makes certain people feel good. It makes them feel better about themselves because they're fighting what they view as the evil or what's wrong with society. So I saw this happening in the party for many, many years. So I think this is why so many, Black Republicans like myself are also kind of viewed as crazy, because you're not liked by your own community for the reason of your political choice. Then you go to your party and they don't like you either if you're standing up for the disenfranchised or Black people, particularly if those Black people are Democrats. So you're really fighting a battle on two fronts. And I decided that I didn't want to fight the battle within the party any longer. I felt that there was no longer an audience. I was no longer even, they say preaching to the choir, the soloist was the organist was not even listening to me any longer. So I opted to become an independent. But I've voted and I've contributed largely to Democrats over the years, including our dear friend, Senator Kamala Harris, now the vice presidential candidate. So it's been a journey for me, and I've always just tried to keep an open mind. I just don't feel anybody should assign anyone their frame of thinking. I think you have a right to evaluate every economic thought, every political thought, every religious faith, and make your determination as to where you agree or disagree with it. But even if you disagree, doesn't mean that you have to castigate, Now, white supremacy, we're not going to have a conversation about that. That's something where I draw the line. But I also recognize that there are people that, one, education. You were talking about knowing your past. Marcus Garvey said, a people that do not know their past is like a tree without roots. And in this country, I think part of the problem, and I think this is global to our friends that are listening around the world, that the kind of history that we were taught about this country just simply did not tell the entire story. And that's why the 1619 Project is so important, amongst others. It's not the only one. Because America needs to really know its history, good and bad. We are all good and bad. We are battling that good versus evil in ourselves. How could a nation not? And I think the history that we've been taught almost puts America in a divine light. That violates my faith. At the same time, I know this country is not a theocracy, so I'll never allow my faith to go into the decisions that are made by myself as to how this nation should be governed, other than the freedom of religion, but the fact that religion should not establish government, what we call the Establishment Clause. And I'm not saying my way of thinking is the right way of thinking, but it makes it easier for me to look at myself in the mirror and to sleep at night when I know that I'm developing a decision from my analysis. As a commissioner, you learn to read the record of the proceeding and to base your decision on the record. And that's the way I try to look at life. It's not always that plain and simple or black and white, but I think particularly as African Americans, but all people, we have to stop allowing ourselves to be labeled, to get out of our comfort zones and try to, as the Native Americans would say, walk a mile in my moccasins. You know,
Well, listen, Commissioner, as an attorney, albeit you're not getting into the discussion of white supremacy, how do you try for the case? And on which side are you of the case around Black Lives Matters? Now, you are a strong sports advocate and probably would have wanted to play professionally if the nation hadn't changed your mind.
I don't know if that was going to happen, but I definitely wanted to play collegiate. Yeah, right.
Okay, dream on. But let's get out of that dream, okay? And let's get to the reality of it. How do you try the case of Black Lives Matter? And which side do you try for?
Well, I think it's a movement that has brought awareness to this country on the issue of...
You say movement, not moment.
I do. I consider it a movement. I do consider it a movement.
Do you think it'll stay a movement, or is it a moment?
I think it'll stay a movement because I believe that the management of law enforcement, many of whom have to make split decisions that involve excessive force, many of whom have been raised and trained to have an inherent bias in believing what they call in the law this pretextual belief that this person is maybe engaged in some illegal activity, so I'm going to stop that car, or I'm going to address them on the sidewalk. I'm going to handcuff them in front of people and then call for backup, and not even really knowing if this person is indeed a threat. But if you've been raised to believe that Black men are a violent threat, are inherently a violent threat, then you already have a certain bias. And again, learning this nation's history, that was taught.
Counselor, was it taught? And then did it matriculate to just the behavior of police? We know the history of policing in this country, right? Cats, runaway slaves, okay? Yeah. Right. We read the history, and we won't try to teach that. People can go Google for that, the history of policing in the U.S. But let's stay right today. Do you think Black Lives Movement and Black Lives Matter are a case of policing, or has policing put the light on larger or other circumstances?
I think the latter. I think after Colin Kaepernick took the knee and the controversy surrounded, and all of a sudden this concocted form of what patriotism is and what patriotism isn't, this belief that you cannot challenge your government. By the way, there are faiths out there that will not pledge allegiance to the flag. Okay, respected faiths that will not pledge allegiance to a flag.
Example being?
Kingdom Hall. And I think there are others out there that say, wait a minute, that's interfering with a covenant that was created between me and a higher power. So all of a sudden now you have this young, brilliant man out of the University of Nevada, Reno, raised by a white family, pledges Kappa Alpha Psi. And
Kappas won't get you for that now. They're proud of it now.
I'm not a Kappa, but my younger brother and my father-in-law are. But he begins to become aware of Black history and Blackness, and begins to see that there's a lot of abuse going on, but yet I'm supposed to pledge allegiance to it. And he made an individual choice, and that choice led to massive criticism. Actually led to him being blackballed by a league, but people looked up and the issue that he was protesting was still happening. Young Black men and women were still being killed in the streets because of what courts and legislatures have determined to be excessive force by police officers. Now, unfortunately, it's very difficult to gain a conviction of an officer. There have been some in the country. So I think, James Baldwin once said that white America created Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. It wasn't Elijah Muhammad. It was the racism that this country had that created a ripeness for a movement that was based upon separating from your oppressor.
Well, I know you love Baldwin, so.
Oh, yes. Yes, never be another. And so I see the same thing in this movement that you've pointed out. It's being fueled by a greater awareness, largely due to technology, of the issue of excessive force, the issue of stop and frisk, the issue of, you are innocent until you're proven guilty by a jury of your peers, being totally disregarded when it comes to a certain segment of people in certain communities.
Well, for years, there have been those who've argued that they were at a disadvantage under the system of justice because of the idea of a jury of peers, where do you find a peer?
Yeah, and voir diring is, I'm not a trial lawyer, but voir dire of a jury is a very refined science. And, you have, by way of census tracts or voting records, it's very difficult to get a jury that looks and maybe even thinks like the defendant. I know that from my colleagues who are part of the trial bar. So it's complicated. And then you have the culture. Now, the comedian Steve Harvey once said that it's not so much that I don't like gangster rap, I don't like the conditions that created it. Mm-hmm. And you can't not recognize, particularly when you're talking about the omnibus crime bill, Iran-Contra, okay, the injection of drugs into certain communities that occurred in the Reagan administration. By the way, the same thing happened in Vietnam with our brave women and men who were fighting under the Nixon administration.
Now you're stating these two things, the injection of drugs into communities, including your own, in some of your own in Northern California, and I'm in Southern California, and Iran-Contra. You're equating these as acts of power.
Well, they were acts of power. They were acts of diverting the law to achieve a certain, defined result. And in the case, and in both cases, much of it had to do with executive power. Now, I don't think there is substantiated evidence that the Nixon administration literally promoted a policy of heroin and other drug use in Vietnam, but there clearly was some level of either government turning a blind eye. I had many friends, largely friends of my older brother and sister, that came back from the Vietnam War addicted, PTSD, schizophrenic, other things that happened. The unfortunate realities. What did Marvin Gaye say? War is hell. When will it end? When will people start to get together again? Yeah, you can listen to that album today, and it's amazing. Every president has said the most difficult decision is sending young women and men into harm's way. Every president, both sides have said that, So but we've been at war in certain
through to today, huh?
Yeah, I mean, President Trump says he wants to end the endless wars. He came into office really criticizing George W. Bush with Afghanistan and Iraq policies, the Bush Doctrine, as it was called. And I think made the country recognize that unless you got to pull out, there's no way you're going to end a war if you don't leave. Now, when you leave, there's a vacuum that occurs. And this happened during the Obama administration with ISIS and the Caliphate when we withdrew, some say prematurely, out of Iraq. So there are always consequences. As a lawyer that advised, companies or individuals making transactions, I would try to give what was called risk-assessed legal advice. That if you do this, this is the risk. If you do that, that's the risk. Now, you make the business decision as to which risk you're prepared to absorb. I will give you the legal advice as to what are the consequences of that decision, because every decision has consequences. Mm-hmm. So, drugs are a big part of the challenges that we have in communities. In many cases, the lack thereof, when we're talking about healthcare. And I know in my community and here in San Francisco, and I've been in downtown Los Angeles, I've been to Skid Row, I know the question of people that do not have healthcare, do not have the ability to get on the medications that they need because of some form of mental imbalance. A mental imbalance that could be the same as a chemical imbalance of some kind, a mental imbalance that may be a result of trauma, a multitude of things. I'm way above my pay grade as president.
Yeah, but I know you have a huge sensitivity to mental illness, and you've expressed your care that that better attention needs to be given to it and less stigma given to it. So please, this is your conversation. Be comfortable to go where you need to.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, I've had members of my own family and friends who have battled mental challenges, whether you want to call it illness or not, including bipolar, schizophrenia, other conditions. And, you know, I remember once having a secretary who was African-American, who was going through major challenges in her life. HR rules required me not to indulge or endeavor too far, but I recommended to her that, you know, human resources, for those who don't use the acronym HR, I recommended to her that she may just want to consider therapy. And I had stepped over the line even in that. And she said, Commissioner Simon, people would think I'm crazy. And I said, you know, at that time I had a couple of therapists. You know, I call them life coaches now, but they're trained as therapists, you know? And so this issue of mental balance or mental health does have a stigma, and it's tragic. I think it's done extraordinary harm to all communities in America. Then you
Wasn't there a young African-American athlete who in the last day or so, maybe today, stepped up to speak to the impact of his brother's passing and what it meant to him? And there's been some social media conversation around him stepping up to that, as you know, and some of it isn't polite. Some of it suggests that it makes him less of an athlete, to, you know, less of a man to say, no, I needed help and I got help. I had some trauma after my brother died, and, you know, I'm not on my game, literally nor figuratively.
Right. Well, I think it gets back to that issue of perfection. We're not perfect. We're not perfect as a nation. We're not perfect as a people. We all have our challenges, physical and mental. And I think the power is in owning it and addressing it and having the means to do so. But if someone is suffering, for example, our dynamic mayor here in San Francisco, Mayor London Nicole Reed, dear friend, she tried to put forth conservatorship laws where conservators could be assigned to those that are homeless and mentally challenged. And by way of that conservator, they could be on their needed prescribed medications to reach a level of competency. I'm not gonna say sanity, but level of competency to make informed decisions. I'm watching W. Kamau Bell on CNN, and he's in Los Angeles, in the homeless area, talking to an officer, African-American, who's very popular. And he said, the problem is it takes 6 weeks for the meds to kick in. And the court system is putting these people back out on the streets. Our people is putting our people back out on the streets and not giving time for the meds to do what meds need to do. In that same segment, he interviewed a generational family of squatters, tent dwellers, a mother and now a daughter that has her own tent. In a city as abundant with wealth and opportunity as Los Angeles. Now, I don't have that silver bullet solution. Trust me, I'd be in a much different status in life if I did. But it is something that we have to be able to own, to openly talk about, and to try to find combined solutions. And I don't think all those solutions, quite frankly, are governmental. That's where, you know, probably our side comes in. I think there is a role, whether it's faith-based community or community-based organizations, but I think we do need to fund these people that are out there trying to get people off the streets. We need, Secretary Ben Carson needs to find ways to better fund housing for people, whether it be transitional housing. And then simultaneously, I live in the most expensive city in the United States after New York, that being San Francisco. You know, I'd love to live in Paris. I can't afford to. And at some point, people that are in the right state of mind have to make the decision that based upon the job market, the housing market, crime, education, other factors. Is this the best place for me? Is there a better place? And do I migrate there the way my family migrated from Oklahoma and Louisiana to what they thought the land of opportunity was in California? You know, that's an ever dynamic and changing, particularly with technology now, particularly with remote work and learning. That's changing now. And I think we're going to see a new level of migration. I think California will always have a net plus of people coming here, but I also, we're going to be able to see an increase.
It's the weather, baby. It's the weather.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that's
particularly your LA
changing,
weather.
and that's changing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some believe it's changing so much that it's burning things up. So,
Well, that is a, you know, that's going to be a topic of discussion as we're now seeing what is now being chronicled as the greatest wildfires in California history. I had a client this morning from New York ask me, well, Timothy, what are you guys going to do if you can't blame this fire on utilities? and that's going to be a big issue in terms of the trial lawyers and in litigation. And of course, I don't argue with the science of climate change. There is a planet warming, and I do believe CO2 is contributing to it. But anybody that has studied the history of the Earth, that this issue of wildfires and what is in essence the revegetation of, you know, growth has been something going on this planet for a long time. So I think we have to have a truthful discussion of how much of it is attributable to climate change and how much of that climate change is attributable to the uses of certain fuel sources and practices and carbon footprint.
well, you know, Commissioner, in my introduction of you, I promised that the listener would get to enjoy snippets of thought around a multitude of subjects. And while you have not failed, I also promised that by rambling through your journey in life and your perspectives, that we would, before we do our 4 for 4, that we would tie that all up in gaining some of your perspective on where we are and what we need to do to get to where we need to be. I think in order to be able to talk about that, we need to start with, where do you think we need to be? Where do we need to be headed? You know, your family headed up out of Port Charles and Tulsa area and landed in Northern California. Here you are. You're contemplating a journey to Paris if you can pull the duckies together. And I can just see you and Kim over there. Although you may need quite a few more duckies than you imagine you need for yourself if you're going to take Kim, because she's
tell me about
she's
it.
a lady accustomed to a certain life.
Yeah, we've shopped on the Champs-Élysées. I got you. I got you there. Yeah.
Please give her my love as well. But let's do our duty to the listener. So we've rambled around a bit. Let's tie some of this up.
Okay. Your
parents, Louisiana, Tulsa, come together in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
They achieve, both of them. Your mom had a bit of stage activity, and your dad certainly had the entertainment industry as a platform for building his wealth. Yet you weren't isolated from some of the cruel realities of life. You've got a brother who suffered from drug addiction, and you've had your own journey with how you manage your thought process, even as a successful professional and engaging therapist. When we look at your life and we platform that on top of what's going on now, in many ways, you've achieved so much exceptional work, and you're continuing to do that. And in some ways, you're just like everybody else, you know. Be that the case, where do we need to be? Who is we, and where do we need to be? Where are we headed? And I'll allow you to isolate this and not speak it so globally in terms of the world, although several of my guests have done so. Why don't you narrow it down to the USA? Where does the USA need to be headed, you know? And then push back to where we are and how we get there.
You know, I read the great author Ismail Reed refer to race pundits, those who are out there making a living on the discussion of race in America. And this has now exploded into a very, I don't know financially how lucrative, but clearly it's an industry that's in demand. But at the end of the day, we're more alike than we are different. And we all should be working towards greater access to information and greater access to opportunities. There's no benefit to society.
Let me argue a little, Lynn, for the sake of hearing you.
Mm-hmm.
Access to information. Some say that the access to information is what will kill us as a human race. Mm-hmm. Others say we die out as communities for lack thereof.
Right. Well, there's a lot of bad.
A little.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad information out there, but I'm in a chapter right now reading about the history of eugenics that many claimed was scientifically based.
You sure are keeping my commitment to my listener. Boy, you bringing it out. Okay, go.
And rambling is the operative word.
Go, eugenics of all things.
Yeah. But,
and Black Lives Matter in the same voice. Okay, well, help me.
They're very related. They are very related because one promoted the inferiority of certain races as compared to the white race, based upon, again, that scientific data at that time. And the other, that being...
And what you were measuring.
It's exactly.
Because some would say
measuring
Tyson
of the cranium and
some would say Tyson is dumb, and others would say he has an athletic genius. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
Some would say Tyson is dumb. Others would say he has an athletic genius.
Yeah, I think he's brilliant on all levels. I've never considered Mike Tyson dumb. I think he's made some decisions as a young, wealthy man from a very troubled background. Again, going to the Native Americans, walk a mile in my moccasins, deal with the loss of Customata, who was so critical to his balance as an athlete and a man, as a man who did not come out of what America has so coined the traditional home environment, which totally castigates those who are coming out of foster care or orphanages or other homes. We don't realize sometimes how our words can hurt. You know, we were raised that, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt. Words hurt.
Right.
Words hurt. And
more abuse has been imposed on people in some circumstances than by words than physical, and can cut a person apart. But we got to start tying it in. So okay. I asked you to espouse, to debate on the idea of information, because you did say we need to get to a place where we have more access to information, and I wanted you to call out, you know, how that makes us better. That's basically what I'm asking.
Well, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I think the pursuit of information, having that thirst for knowledge, puts you on the path of finding the truth, even if that truth is your truth. You know, by way of seeing the examples, no man is an island, the way of seeing the examples, no person's an island, excuse me, in the way of seeing the different examples. I love biographies and seeing the examples of other people's lives and challenges that they face. So I do believe that information is going to play a very important part in removing the ignorance. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. In removing the ignorance that I believe feeds much of the disparity that we see in the state, that we see in this country. And if you don't have a belief that you can contribute to its elimination, then you have to begin to question what is your role or purpose in your life.
So you spoke to more access to information and opportunity, or one might, you know, singularize it and say more access to more information as opportunity. However we look at it, then if that's where we want to get, how do we get there, and whose responsibility is that? Is that the responsibility of government? Is that the responsibility of the individual? Do NGOs and institutions, how do we get there? Is it a collective?
I think it begins with the individual. I think the belief, you know, and as I say to my children, either you're going to manage life or life's going to manage you. And I think everyone has to try to do their best to put themselves in the best position to have better control of their destiny. I don't know if you ever achieve complete control of your destiny. So at the end of the day, I do believe that is the individual, because if you do not believe that, then I think you're succumbing to the stereotypes or the creation of the stereotypes, those words that have harmed certain communities. So I think it is important to give every individual equal access. As I said, as a commissioner in trying to advance supplier diversity, it's not a level playing field. We have to levelize it. We have to have mechanisms, market and regulatory mechanisms, that create a certain ubiquitous equality in the marketplace. Now, competition.
And you said that as a Republican?
I did.
Okay, I just had to get that out there.
I did. The affirmative action programs under the federal government came out of the Nixon administration. The minority set aside programs that Republicans went on to criticize and fight against. Those were Republican creations. You know what? I'm going to have you back on to talk about what happened to the Republican Party. We're going to have to talk about that. Don't do that now. We're going to have to talk about that. Yeah. But you think that it begins with the individual, and then you think government does have a role in getting us there. Yes, I do. I think they have a role, not the entire role, but government has to fight against discrimination. Government needs to ensure that.
Why?
Because it harms a nation and a society. It creates an imbalance that as they say, if it doesn't come out in the wash, it'll come out in the rinse. It creates an imbalance that, in my view, affects the functionality of government and the economy. If I'm running a consumer retail firm, I want to get to as many consumers as I can, right? I want them to have access to my products, okay? So you think about the amount of business that was lost by businesses that segregated against African Americans. That made absolutely no sense whatsoever.
So when you approach inclusion, diversity and inclusion, you're approaching it from a perspective of prosperity and a rising tide lifts all boats, as much as you are a perspective of fairness and leave no person behind.
Right. It's the emerging domestic market, EDMs. I heard former HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros speak about it. It's the emerging domestic markets. And by the way, by way of this technology that we're speaking now, I think people are tapping into those markets more effectively than any time in history, because it doesn't require you being on Rodeo Drive, to have access to certain products.
It can work both ways, because for me, I know that technology did become my geography.
Yes, it did.
And it dramatically improved my ability to grow my company in the offerings, in the expertise, and in the geography that we operated from. So as we round this then, and we get to where we need to be, is creating more access to information and opportunity, or access to information as opportunity. And we're going to get there by a collective of the individual effort and the governmental regulation and institutional efforts. And they look like some of the work you did where I came to know you, which was through your work as a commissioner in the utilities. How does that platform, and what are some of those elements of that might platform across any industry or any opportunity to markets?
Well, utilities have extraordinary advantage by way of, in many cases, being monopolies, even though competition has moved into the telecom and to a large extent, even the energy industry in terms of certain deregulated markets. But be that as it may, utilities have enormous power. And in order to achieve what that power has granted them, they have to have the ability to be an economic stimulus. They do. In fact, economic development is one of the missions of most of your state commissions around the country, understanding the economic impact that utilities have. I feel that that's largely achieved by expanding the supply base to include those vendors or partners that bring new ideas. We've proven that the African American community is an amazing wealth of ideas. And utilities benefit from having access to, and I'm going to start with African American communities because that is my community, but also other critical communities in that thought and competitive market process, be it the Latinx community or the Asian community, women businesses, LGBTQ businesses. All of these bring in a wealth of value and information and technology and the ability to properly educate communities about energy. But be that as it may, there's one particular community that had to deal with 250 years of slavery, another 100 years of Jim Crow, and what we're witnessing today. So as I talk about diversity and my role as a commissioner in advancing diversity, California just recently hit 12.7 billion of utility diversity spend. And I give my kudos to my brothers and sisters on the California Public Utilities Commission and their stewardship of this effort. But there's just so much more opportunity out there that I think utilities can achieve. We are becoming a minority majority state, and we're becoming a minority majority nation. And the best thing that the majority at this time could do is begin to embrace and understand that, and understand the power and prosperity that can be therefrom. If the education is not properly informing the public, then these developments create fear and anxiety that people will be losing their status in society. And I believe there's enough opportunity where there are always going to be winners and losers. We get that. But I believe there's enough opportunity in this nation and in this world to where we can do what we can to levelize that playing field so that more people have access to that opportunity. They may blow it. I get that. But one thing I learned as a corporate lawyer was watching the white executives who would lose millions of dollars and then get a promotion or be signed to another subsidiary. I'm not saying that that necessarily was privilege. I think someone made a conscious business decision that even though this guy didn't make the shot, he's competitive, he or she, he has good handles, as we say, and I want to give them another shot. I think they deserve it. That's what a meritocracy should represent, that ability to win or to sometimes lose, but understanding that it's a long season. So these kind of discussions are needed to be taking place more. By the way, not just in the utility space, because there are a number of companies that ride upon the utility backbone, whether it be the Googles and Facebooks or the solar industry, the distributed solar industry, the internet side of, there's a whole area of energy called the Internet of Things. And it's how the internet is impacting the way we calculate the big data demand of energy. And these are all areas that we should be actively engaged in. These are all areas where I think utilities and the companies that ride on utilities should be funding to be taught in HBCUs, in high schools, in grammar schools, and by the way, other colleges as well. I think sometimes people feel that when we put a focus on African American communities, we're taking away from other communities. I don't think that's the intent. I really don't. It is that this is a great opportunity here. This is a great market. We've had,
and I know at my own HBCU, North Carolina A&T State University, I know that one of the fastest growing populations there is white women in the engineering schools. So,
and if I had a dime for every Wall Street investment banker I met from North Carolina A&T, okay, who went on to Northwestern or Stanford Business School or Harvard Business School, an amazing track record of success in your esteemed alma mater amongst many around the country. And I do think that there's a greater focus on that talent base now. You're always going to find a certain degree of optimism in me.
Well, my point in that was that HBCU, when you break it out and say historically Black colleges and universities, the ear hears Black, but the operative word is historic.
Correct. And I think it should be pointed out that if any of your listeners around the world were to step foot on an HBCU campus, they'd be shocked at how many other races
they find
are enrolled at these universities.
If you look at one of our women's athletic teams, you might think you were at an Ivy League.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we don't have many sisters on the athletics.
Right. Yeah. And same with the football team. I mean,
Let me correct that. We don't have many sisters of color. But I do want you to get back into your point, because I got to get you to play 4 for 4 with me. So please.
Okay. And what point was that? I'm hoping that
So as you conclude around the thought that the utility industry is a platform for many other industries to grow, and so the things you learned there can be operative around diversity and inclusion.
Well, you know, I'm a commissioner emeritus with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. I chaired the gas committee amongst a number of other committees and subcommittees when I was a member as an active commissioner. And I want to commend the utilities around the country, because there's not a utility you can talk to now that doesn't have a defined program to increase their diverse procurement as well as their workforce. And yes, some of them are de minimis, but I think the fact that the dialogue is now in the boardroom is a good thing in the end, but it has to be sustained. Everybody talks about sustainability. I think that sustainability is often referenced in terms of carbon footprint, but the sustainability of keeping the pipeline fluid of the talent base that exists in the African American and other communities that have historically not been evaluated under the same criteria. I'll go back to Governor Schwarzenegger, if I may. When I became his appointment secretary, he said, if you have an African American applicant and a white applicant, and they have the same score, I want you to go to the African American applicant. He said, now, if you have, under that same criteria, if the African American applicant, say, gets 5 points lower than the white applicant, he said, I want you to still go with the African American, because his life story, his or her life story in getting here was more than likely, you know, not you know, it's no one size fits all, more challenging than the white applicant. And that was the basis of how he began the process under my watch of staffing his administrations, his board and commissions. That's the same way we have to look at how we're evaluating. I don't like the term qualified. I like the term competitive. You wouldn't be in the pool if you weren't qualified. The question is, are you competitive? Can you do the job equally or better than someone else? And I think utilities have a great opportunity as infrastructure companies to begin to bring in more engineers, more architects, more chemists. And by the way, one criticism, you know, as you know, I chair the Black Chamber here in California. And one criticism I've had of our organizations is that I've said, let's give a scholarship to that young, brilliant person that wants to be a mass transit operator, or wants to be a pipe fitter, or a member of the IBEW, because that is a critical part of our workforce. And you would know much better than me, Ms. Howroyd, about global success. But in many ways, that's a more critical part of our workforce than some of the thought leaders, clearly the thought leaders, you know, but others. So, you know, I do think that utilities play a very important role in this economy by way of climate change and other decarbonization efforts, expanding broadband, and particularly 5G. All of these should be viewed as opportunities for communities that have historically not had equal access to that development.
Well, wow. I know we're going to get some comments about that. And from an ex-Republican. I guess the operative term is ex. Listen, we got to play 4 for 4, okay? So just to repeat, my listeners know this, but for you, and you're a listener, so you know this as well, I'm going to ask you 4 questions, and you're going to give me 4 answers. And they can be fire shot answers, or you can go where you need to go with it, okay? You ready for your first question?
I am.
Okay. It's actually one that flows well from the conversation we've just had, likely. Maybe not, knowing you, huh, Commissioner?
Oh,
what are the 4 books that you recommend any adult be reading right now that you found enjoyment from, and why?
Oh boy, that's a really good one.
You got a lot of them behind you.
Yeah, I read all the time. One I would say would be The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. I think it's an amazing story of the Great Migration and what prompted it. I'm always going to throw some W.B. Du Bois in there. souls of Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
That is also a very important one for everyone of every race or background to embrace. I'm going to have to put, your recently authored work in there as well.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which,
Thank you very much.
I've had the honor to delve into. I haven't completed it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't want to keep, I'm a race man, but I don't want to keep just going back to the issue of race. And something that really influenced me as an economics major before I went to law school was The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a must read to understand the good and the bad of the marketplace that we have. And now
I tagged that back up on my Kindle recently to jump into.
I think I will too.
I felt that I had a lot of work to do to get myself ready to read into it with this 2020 environment of everything exploding.
Yes.
But then I thought, no, maybe this is the perfect time to jump back in.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Adam Smith had a certain prophetic aspect to his economic thought. Not all of it was right. He wasn't a fan of government unions, for example. He said management and labor should not, meet or conspire. I think when we look at police excessive force today, one of the challenges most honest public servants would say is the police unions. Well-intended, but oftentimes too powerful. So understanding these historic developments in the notion that there's nothing new under the sun, I think that Wealth of Nations, amongst many other works, I think are, but since I'm limited to 4, that would be the 4 that I'd recommend. All
right. And by the way, if you want to share others, certainly send them in and I'll share them through my media platform.
Absolutely.
2 of 4. Okay. What are you listening to? And why? So the 4 things you're listening to. Now, I heard you reference Marvin and what's going on. Oddly enough, quite a few people that's been one of their 4, not to suggest it's one of yours.
Well, I love all music. I'm addicted to jazz. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of classic Donald Byrd. I love Sarah Vaughan. I also love the blues. I was watching a movie last night where in the background, probably a lot of the viewers didn't realize it was a movie starring Mary J. Blige called Body Cam, but they're playing the Albert King classic, The Sky is Crying, Baby. So I love blues and jazz.
Mary J. Blige loves the blues.
Yes, she does. She's a blues artist.
Yeah.
Blues artists. You have a number of artists today who are really carrying the blues tradition, even though commercially they can't say that, Right. But you listen to them.
Well, you got a lot of reasons for people to sing the blues.
That's right. You're absolutely right. So I love jazz. I love blues. I particularly love blues and the jazz idiom, where either by way of Ellington or Miles or Coltrane. And I want to give a shout out, Wynton Marsalis just released a recent album called The Funky Lowdown, which is absolutely brilliant. I think it's right up there with Blood in the Fields.
Listen, now, is it following Wynton's path, or has he verved out? I saw him talking about it on Bill Maher's show. Wasn't he? I mean, his conversation even shut Bill up.
Yeah, he has grown immensely. When he first broke into the scene and was attacking Miles Davis and George Benson and others for becoming more contemporary, folks were referring to him as the Republican Congress of jazz. But I think Wynton has grown immensely in recognizing the majesty of the blues and understanding the different elements of the blues. The Funky Lowdown is...
He can't beat up Benson, though, because, George Benson, what was that? Are we really happy here in this lonely...
Yeah. But if you go back into some of the Blue Note George Benson recordings, I'll always give a special space for Wes Montgomery and Grant
Day in the Life. A
Yeah,
Day in the
yeah,
Life.
yes.
Yeah.
But Benson can go, like many of the artists that decided to go with some R&B or contemporary, and I remind jazz purists that the Duke Ellington band was a dance band.
Yeah.
That the Count Basie band was a dance band.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
Jimmy Lunceford, we can go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, but I do really enjoy jazz, and particularly the avant-garde jazz. I like the thought process, the freedom of thought. It's very, in fact, Stanley Crouch, the famed writer, he said that jazz may be the most perfect example that we have of democracy. You know?
Well, it was America's gift as well, along with R&B.
Absolutely. And as long as you can bring it, you're welcomed in the jazz world. Of course, there's, you know, issues of race there.
Tighten up on who number 4 is, though, if you're throwing it out there.
Who what?
Number four to listen to.
To listen to, I enjoy information. So I do, when I'm in my car, which has been rare under COVID, I listen to Sirius XM Urban View. I feel they have some very good hosts that are really bringing a fresh perspective. But I'll also try to balance it with, you know, CNBC. And when I say listen, this plays in my office, but I often can't look at it because I'm working. And then if I get a client call, I'll turn it down. But I like news and information. I like most of the Bloomberg programming as well. You know, I just enjoy it. I'm not trying to be the smartest guy in the room. I just enjoy it. I enjoy absorbing information.
And you know, I kind of cut you off on you were gonna say why you were recommending Winton's new piece.
Well, I think it's in the tradition of his suites, like City Movement and Blood in the Fields, which he received, I believe, was the Pulitzer Prize for. Kind of similar to the great work that Terrence Blanchard did after Katrina, but it's telling both a rich musical and political story. You know, we have always been able to incorporate our politics into music, whether it was the Temptations' Ball of Confusion or Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. We've always have been, you know, the many great songs of the staple singers in terms of the freedom rider songs. And I believe that Winton, through the jazz idiom, has captured that tradition of advocacy through the funky lowdown. I've always loved when artists, you know, artists vote. Artists are, I think, entitled as athletes, and they're both entertainers, but I think their political views I often richly value because their thought process requires them to look at a world or a medium that we sometimes do not see. You know,
yeah, that element of sensitivity that they have to bring to be able to capture and then deliver out requires them to be aware, to be listening as well as participating, sometimes listening more than participating.
Correct.
So yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay, your third of 4, you get to sit down to dinner with any 4 people you wish at it from any period of life, living or dead. Who's at your table other than you, the 4?
Oh boy.
Living or dead?
Living or dead. Sojourner Truth.
Because?
Courage. Just standing in the face of the most brutal and oppressive system in the history of mankind, in my opinion. And I, you know, of course, there are others in there. I would say Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner. I'm speaking of period here.
Collectively, but Sojourner gets to come to the table.
Yes,
who else?
Comes to the table. W.B. Du Bois, because I believe that he really changed the game in the recognition of our thought in world thought. Our thoughts, our ideas, our research, by the way, as a profound sociologist, you know, our research.
R as Black or R as U.S. or R as a people, a world?
I view Du Bois as a global figure.
Okay.
And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being a domestic black figure, but I think Du Bois, you know, he spent his last years in Ghana completing the Encyclopedia Africana, but he was a globalist, he was a Pan-Africanist, and he, you know, his written debates with Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey are just absolute thought classics. You know, Souls of Black Folks, you can read tonight and you'll walk like, you know, when he read it. So
in one of my 3 copies.
Yeah.
Who else is at the table? You got 2 more guests to invite.
You know, there are so many great jazz artists. And as you're talking, I'm trying to think of which one would I want to be at a table with. And for me, it would be Louis Armstrong. Because just like we look at life and calendars as before Christ and after Christ, in terms of music and pop culture, you have before Louis Armstrong and after Louis Armstrong. You know, yes, Miles Davis was a thought leader. Duke Ellington, our greatest composer in this nation of all times. But Armstrong's impact on society and the world through his trumpet, through his voice, through his style, you know, that New Orleans gentleman style that he had. As a child, I thought Louis Armstrong was shining, as we used to call it, you know, shining for white folks, as we would call it.
Right, I know what you mean.
But as I've studied him more and more, I know you have a large audience. So, you know, someone in Antwerp is saying, "What does he mean by shining?" You know,
I just recently saw, and watch them all rush to Google it, right? Yeah. I just recently, go on guys, Google it. I just recently saw on YouTube, I found a video of Louis Armstrong and Mahalia Jackson.
Ooh.
They were quite the thing on that stage.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. And his duet with Ella Fitzgerald is still, you know, a classic.
Ella, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I was Googling.
She was my husband's favorite singer, my dear husband's favorite singer.
The perfect voice. You can't talk vocalist without Ella Fitzgerald coming up in the top 5. You know, I saw I was Googling Armstrong all night one night, and he was performing in Paris in the 20s. And I'm telling you, this tuxedo he had on, I would die for. I mean, that's the thing that a lot of folks don't realize, that just how much style and grace that Armstrong brought to us, you know, to us. And he always
Katharine Hepburn and for Bing Crosby and maybe my guy, I'm not sure, but in the Philadelphia Story, I think, didn't he show up in that movie as well?
The Philadelphia Story starring Denzel?
No. Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, I don't know if I saw that.
Way back.
Yeah,
I'll check it out. I'll fact check myself.
I know he was in Hello Dolly with Barbara Streisand.
No, I think he was definitely in a Bing Crosby, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn romp. I think the name of it was the Philadelphia Story. Maybe somebody's Googling it now and they'll let us know if we're right before it's over.
Kern, I can't remember his first name, but the historian pointed out in his documentary, Jazz, there were so many artists who literally mimicked Armstrong vocally, like Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby. And Benny Goodman admits that all he did was play Armstrong on the clarinet. You know,
kind of like Mick Jagger admitting he was dancing like Tina Turner on stage.
Right. Yeah, like Tina Turner and James Brown. Yeah, and then you can't hear a trumpet without hearing Armstrong. You know, just what he did for that art form and the level that he would rise in the registers and then pull that mouthpiece off his lips and sing a beautiful song or ballad. So I'd love to just be at the table with an Armstrong to hear what it was like.
Actually, you're having dinner with these 4 guests. That's the clue to the movie. It's actually called High Society.
Ah, yes.
The movie High Society.
High Society.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong was in there. They just loved him so much.
Yeah. Boy, I think
you got one more guest.
One more. Any astronaut that has gone through space.
Well, we have one from my school, North Carolina A&T, who was the first Black astronaut. So but then again, we're having your table filled with just Black folks, huh?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll go with John Glenn.
Okay.
Go with John Glenn.
Okay.
As a kid, he was my hero as an astronaut. I thought he was a very balanced member of Congress. He was, in my view, a Renaissance man. And I would have loved to be at a table just to hear his stories of, going into a world that no one has, I sound like Star Trek now, right? But going into a world that no one has ever achieved. So at least to our knowledge.
Are you a Trekkie?
Not deep in Trek, but I did watch I watched all of the Captain Kirk Star Treks as a kid. I did not watch the subsequent, renditions of it.
Well, regardless, you've got an elegant dinner table. I would be very impressed, but as I was not invited, I'll kindly serve at your table. Thank you. Now we got to go 4 for 4. And thank you so much for playing with me.
Well, we've had dinner many times, so
on a very serious, I won't be in there with those guests you got. On a very serious note here, what are the 4 pieces of advice you would give to our listeners, collective, or any one listener you may want to target based on a circumstance or a location?
I'm not going to make it gender. As a person thinketh, so is he or she, try to maintain a positive outlook on life, to make positive things happen in your life. Okay.
That's one. Thank you very much.
People do not plan to fail. People fail to plan. You have to have a plan, and don't be afraid to alter or modify that plan. And by failure, I'm not meaning, financially or athletically. I'm talking about balance and happiness, and that leads to my next one. Always check your happy meter. I recently. I recently read where I think Copenhagen has the highest level of happiness in the world. Now that's very hard to measure, and how do you? Someone could say, well, no, it's Botswana, some city in Botswana, but.
But the Dalai Lama, I was sitting at USC, our kids' alma mater, my husband would always remind me, you didn't do it by yourself. I had a little bit to do with it. And I say, yeah, just a little bit. And he'd fall out laughing. But he and I sat on the front row at USC when the Dalai Lama spoke. And the Dalai Lama went on for quite some time. And his whole message was that regardless of what we do from a spiritual or religious place, what we're really looking for is happy. That was his happiness. Happy. Simple word, HAPPY.
Yeah. You would think, what
happy happens when you plan for it, as you say.
Well, the founders of this nation who owned, our ancestors, unfortunately. I don't like to use that term ownership, but they possessed them, or however we want to describe it. When I think about when they established the structure of the goals of this society, that the pursuit of happiness was established. And it's made me understand that ability to find happy is so critical. I watched my mother laugh until she closed her eyes. She was battling multiple myeloma cancer, but if she found something that she thought was funny, she would laugh. And I think that ability to laugh through everything.
Yeah, the lady with the lamp, she says, send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me, right? Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wrecked refuge of your tempest shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. Built a land to capture a brighter future for those who don't come from such circumstance.
No doubt. And that's so fundamental to my faith. That's why I went back to the Catholic Church, because I have a very strong commitment in giving to the poor. And I do mean giving, because as my mother would say to me, you don't give to receive, you give from your heart. And then number 4, which I think is one of the most difficult things to embrace and to teach, and that's to love thyself.
Wow.
To love thyself, to have that love of yourself, and to place that as a true priority and understand that we are all flawed. We are, but you have to have, in my view, this uncontrollable love affair with yourself.
You've had me laughing and quite excited, but don't make me cry. That was one of the things that that was the thing that my husband wanted most from me.
Wow.
He would often say, you have such a great capacity to love, and speak of my capacity to love. And he said, the only thing he wished for me is that I would learn to love myself.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I have love for myself in many ways. And he acknowledged that, but he believed that you really needed to learn to love yourself fully and completely, you know? And he did that. He
Oh
was
my God.
a beautiful person. Such a beautiful person.
Having the blessing of viewing just a snippet of his life story. I told your very brilliant son, the fruit doesn't fall far from the vine, that his father should have been the most interesting man in the world in the Dos Equis commercial series. Because
look, this conversation is totally about you and from you, but I got to tell you, you're right on that. I had the privilege of loving for over 40 years a man who every day woke up excited about the day, no matter what was going on. And he'd grown up as a kid during World War II and learned the values that Britain taught its youth during that time, and then expanded that with his knowledge of people as he traveled the world for 5 years before settling in the United States by choice. He was an immigrant. He was a white male, and people didn't see him as immigrant. He was an immigrant. And I got to tell you, Commissioner, we had a hell of a ride together. He was awesome. So thank you. Your last lesson is one that maybe my husband is sending me a message from you if I want to go there and think that way.
I am honored, blessed, and humbled to channel that from Bernie, Mr. Howroyd, and the amazing homegoing under these difficult COVID circumstances, the amazing homegoing that you gave that brilliant, great, loving, passionate man was beyond description.
Not I gave. I would say my children, he would say our children.
Right.
Catherine and Brett stepped up and they delivered to that. Quite honestly, I was still physically not able to manage forward. You are my first podcast since his transition, and I knew it would be a safe and a bold conversation to have with you. So you are the first we wanted to do that with, and I really thank you for having been such an awesome guest. Such an awesome guest.
Thank you. The honor is mine beyond words. I don't have the vocabulary to capture it, but Ms. Howroyd, God bless you for the great work that you do, for the positivity that you have put forth by way of social media and your publications and your life. I guess, as you know, there are many people that look to you as their guiding light, and I'm amongst that group. I'm honored to be amongst that group of people. So God bless you and your ministry, and your journey, because it is clear that you are on a mission, and that mission is one of good. And, I feel blessed to have met you, to know you, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to continue this conversation in a multitude of
Well, we got several other things we got to talk about, we will do that.
Yeah.
Please give Kim my best. You are so blessed to have such a beautiful lady in your life. I'm glad you're able to be quarantined with her. And thank you for having been a guest again from my home from my heart to yours. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.